Okay, well, it looks like it's time to get started. Thank you guys all for joining us bright and early this morning. This is Bridging the Community Divide, Communities and Cross-Platform MMOs. So first off, I'm going to introduce these fine people who are going to be doing most of the talking today. I just get to ask questions. That's my payment for having to stand up for the entire talk. We're going to go through what the different communities are that we're talking about and similarities and differences between them, some of the challenges made by certain decisions in the development process, styles of communication we use, some of the interplay between the different communities and how differing platforms affect their growth. And then if we are nice and quick, we will get time for some of your questions. So I'm Eric Ocho Cleaver. I'm a community and social media manager at NetEase. My background is heavily in PC MMO, games like City of Heroes and EverQuest. I spent about 8 years of my career working in PC MMOs, and I said, I really want to do something different. I'm going to go work for a mobile gaming company, so I applied to work at NetEase, and they were very excited. They hired me on. It was great, and about 2 months in, they're like, hey, we should launch a cross-platform MMO, not only on mobile, but also on PC. So it gave me a really interesting perspective in looking at how PC MMOs with a straight one platform play differently than cross-platform MMOs, and it was something I thought was interesting, so I thought we should talk about it. So Em, why don't you introduce yourself?
I happen to work with Sir Cleaver over here. I'm taking full credit for being the one who hired him. This is the second time I've done so. Very, very happy, as always. I have been in the gaming industry since straight out of college. So since 1991, and I always kid that I kind of did it back-assward, because most people come in sort of a support function, and then jump into development. And I started off as a writer game designer back in the Sega Genesis days. And after doing that for 5 years, I was approached by Sega, who said, we love your communication background, and we think you should try the communication thing on our peer-to-peer platform, and that's how I jumped into community relations. I did the hands-on thing for about 10 years and then jumped into management, and I've been building community teams ever since. So that's a little bit about me.
We also have Linda Carlson.
Right. I do apologize. I came here with a sort of a bad cold. So if you have a bad cold, don't come anywhere near me, because then we will breed a superbug that will wipe out humanity. I always thought that would start off in LA, but San Francisco's a good second choice.
San Francisco's the
yeah,
place,
exactly.
But, yeah.
I do enjoy working with communities simply because I love learning about human nature. It is most often depressing, but sometimes you get pockets of brilliance. And I remain convinced that the online interactions that we have are helping us to grow a reasonable, rational, global community. And so while I work specifically in games, it's because I want to work with humanity. And yeah, there's my games listed on there. And that's not even all of them. I would also like to add that Eric Cleaver has worked for me twice. So I see a pattern emerging here. It must be like when I get sick of working with him, he goes over to work for M, and then he comes back over to me. So it's my turn next, Mr. Cleaver.
Over my dead body, sorry.
Our most intelligent panelist is John here, and John's smart because he doesn't work in community full-time.
Oh.
Something like that, yes. So I started our game company. We started development back in '96, actually, but we became more of a formal startup in '98 with our own office and everything. And being the wide-eyed, inexperienced person that I was like, hey, why don't we try making a giant online game? No one's done that before. That seems like a great idea. So as a result, we've been making the same game for like 20 years. And it's been a hell of a ride. It went online in 2002, and we've continually expanded it since then, including platforms, bringing it over to mobile in 2010, and then more recently into VR, and starting to consider other platforms beyond that. So our community's been, I think, like everybody who interacts with the community, it's been like one of the greatest aspects of our game, and also one of the most challenging, and it's a huge part of the reason why we're still here. So very happy to be here.
And our final panelist is Troy Hewitt.
Too soon?
Too soon, definitely.
Carrie, I love her. Anyway, yeah, my name's Troy Hewitt. Unlike him, I began my career when the internet was here. So I been doing online community management. My background is actually human services. And so like Linda, I fell into this community stuff with a belief that people are good when you give them the opportunity to rise to the expectations of the community, and I really have enjoyed that piece of it. And I do believe that our work is creating people who are taking these skills into the real world, and so I'm very passionate about it. As far as the cross-platform stuff, I'm living the dream at an indie studio with a bunch of friends that I've worked with throughout my career on MMOs, and it's been very interesting, but we are working on a cross-platform user-generated content game where they can build their own stuff and then share it with their friends. And it's sort of like Minecraft meets combat meets good community citizen meets, and we call it Quark, which is quantum universe interaction and replication kit. So a lot of science, a lot of fun. But we started on the HTC Vive and then moved to PC, Mac OS, and then added mobile. So we have all the platforms. And yeah, so we'll talk about that and what a wonderful challenge it is.
Okay. So let's talk about communities on different platforms. One of the first things I get asked when talking to anybody new about communities is there a difference between, say, PC and mobile gamers? How do console players play into it? So let's talk a little bit about these groups. So Linda, are these groups the same? Are they different? Both? Neither?
Wow, thanks for asking me to talk first. Nobody else is going to get to go for 40 minutes now.
Nah, you did it.
One of the interesting things that I find is that communities are very, very different from one another. I worked on both EQ and EQ2, and although those two games had superficial similarities, their communities were completely different from one another. And when you're talking about cross-platform games, anything that runs on the PlayStation or Xbox, on mobile and on PC. I mean, if anybody's done that quadrifecta, I mean, I've certainly worked on communities that bridge three of those divides, and the communities do act very differently, and the thing that I have found over the years is they each prefer a different communication platform. Yeah. Some communities prefer to be on forums. Some communities do almost all of their communications on Twitter. Some really like their Reddits. Discord is a really rapidly growing community platform, and it's one of the hardest to manage. And you have to go where your players are, because you can set up your own platform and think that's where the players are going to go, but that's not true. You have to be prepared to support where they naturally, organically want to go based on their communication preferences.
So, John, you have an established game that you've added to new platforms over time. Mm-hmm. Do you find that people come to the existing communications platforms, or does each new wave of players go to a different communications platform?
It's kind of a mixture. You know, when we added a lot of mobile users, you would certainly see like more interactions via Facebook and things like that and social media. At the same time, our game is incredibly hardcore, and people tend to interact with the existing players pretty commonly. And as a result, there's a certain degree of like training that goes on from the existing players saying, hey, you know, if you want to get developer attention or whatever, you should really post on the forums, or you should use a support ticket or whatever. So we do have that happen, but we do definitely have to monitor other channels in addition to that.
So, I think that has something similar to do with your experience, because the game that you're working on right now, it's cross-platform, Crusaders of Light, is a very hardcore game with very long play sessions. So how do you think that plays into where communities form and how they communicate?
Yeah, well, as you're very familiar with, we see a lot of action on Facebook, actually. So, you know, like everyone has said, we modify to there. You know, when you're dealing, so this is a mobile game, but it's very hardcore MMO. You still are getting a lot of those classic PC gamers. So there's a lot of discussions that they get really, really into it. There's so much having to do with that game. You know, message boards still play a part in that, because people want to get into real deep discussions, because the game has so multi-layered and has so many so many different things going on. So, in that case, there's a lot of that kind of interaction going on message boards, and they really, really react to Facebook. So those are the ones that we concentrate a lot on.
So one of the things I think is really interesting is how different decisions play in from a development perspective into how your community interacts with one another. Are play spaces shared between the different platforms? Are the Xbox players playing with the PC players all in one playground? Or are they walled off into separate little gardens? Similarly, can a player log in on PC, play on PC, log out, log in on their phone, and play their same character, maintaining their same progression? How do you guys think these decisions interact how you're going to talk to your community later? Troy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do. So right now, the experience that we had trying to create a product that had playability parity, VR versus PC and Mac OS was a really interesting challenge for us because it's definitely a different way of doing things, and the VR space is still trying to figure out how users should be using their stuff. And so it was fun to kind of explore that. In the future, in just a few months, we are bringing the mobile folks into the fold, and that'll create an even more interesting how do we balance what a VR player can do versus what a PC, Mac OS person can do, and a person on the phone. For me, it is, how do you get all those folks in the same place if you want to? How do you, for instance, with our mobile phone, with our mobile app, I have a real hard time incorporating any kind of chat, especially when you start looking at what happens on a global launch. Our game is really geared for younger kids. Right now we're in the Philippines with the mobile app, and they use Facebook a ton, way more than I thought they would. And whereas other gamers, maybe not so much on Facebook, maybe they're more on Discord. We try not to depend too heavily on Twitter just because it appears to be the place you go to get, harassed and abused. But yeah, so it is interesting to try to find those pockets of people and to bridge that divide. But we really do want to have this unified cross-platform experience, and we need to sit down and start talking about what are those mobile player expectations versus the PC gamer expectations versus that VR expectation. What we don't want to do is focus on one and have the other two lie fallow. Or not recognize great strides and jumps in what's happening, both on mobile and on PC. Stuff is really easier for me to track just because that's where my head has been. But there's a lot of new stuff coming down the pike technologically, and we want to make sure that we are offering ways for them to build relationships, and maybe they will take that mobile piece and get into the PC piece, because maybe there is, our game has aspects of building in it. Maybe it's easier to build on a PC or on a Mac. And we find a way to allow folks to have their fun, casual gaming experience while they're running through a particular map, but then transitioning over to the PC when they want to spend a good 2 hours building. And then, VR folks, we have people who have spent, 6 hours on a stretch. And how many of you have put on a VR rig? I can do about 10 minutes. So, these people are committed and they're building and they're using. So, they're very specialized groups. We do really want to make sure we're finding a place for them all to get the information, even if that information isn't going to be the same by platform. So it's a really interesting challenge. What I don't want are 3 different SKUs where they all play together. I want there to be information that you need dependent upon what phone you're using and what country you're in and all of those little details, but to have a centralized space where you can belong, which I think to me is the core of what community is all about.
So John, you've added more platforms over time, layering in additional groups of gamers. How is your approach to the shared play spaces, login fungibility?
So,
Did you use the word fungibility?
I did. I even included
Get your bingo
10
kids
points.
out.
10 points.
got
Your
the
bingo
definition
cards out,
there.
kids.
So I basically, one of my overall goals is that I both oversee the design of the game as well as things like community engagement and things like that. And when we approached mobile, it was what this idea, it was quite early, that, hey, this is really cool that my phone can now run this stuff. I would really like to be able to run my game on this, and if I want that, maybe someone else might want that. So it's not very complex analytics-driven decision-making or anything like that. But as a result, when we got into it, it was with continuing our model of all platforms interact in the same shared universe and everything would be seamless from one to the other. And there are definitely some really significant trade-offs in using that approach. We have a Twitch model combat game, so our combat's like completely real time. And really, you're not going to be able to be as effective, from a UX perspective of using a game like that on a mobile device, even with a game controller, as you probably will be on a desktop with a mouse and keyboard. So there's always a certain degree of the perception of that trade-off within our user base. At the same time, we have driven a lot of mobile people to also play on PC and a lot of PC people to play on mobile, and they're like, hey, I'm on a bus, I can interact with my guild, they're doing some sort of big raid thing right now, I don't have to I can be some sort of support thing in the background, or I can just be hanging out with them or whatever. So it's been really popular, but there's always a degree of this kind of ongoing competition between different subsets of people, and also just the expectation of the respective user base. PC players, especially PC MMO players, they're expecting something that's going to be pretty intense when they get into it. There isn't really, there's certain MMOs that are kind of casual, but they're not casual like Angry Birds casual. And when you ship a mobile MMO, the expectation of the user is often like, hey, this is the second game I've ever played, or something like that. And it's really hard to bring that user along into a really complex environment and kind of, teach them about what's going on in a way that they're willing to accept. So I'll say that it's been a really cool experience overall, and it's still an ongoing challenge that we haven't really cracked the code on. We also have a lot of VR users. We've got about 10,000 VR users over Gear VR and Daydream and things like that. We've got people playing, 3, 4, 5 hours at a time, which is a lot of, time spent optimizing the heat threshold of a mobile phone and things like that. It's not a simple problem, and if someone were to come to me and be like, should I do one or the other, I would say that would really depend on your game design and your community, because it's really hard to make a single game that works, that is the best possible game across all the different platforms, because the usability constraints are so significantly different.
The behaviors of, I want to add, and I wanted to ask you a question personally, just because we're kind of running through the same mental exercise.
Sure.
But with the mobile space, you have so many different phones, and that have been treated and dropped, and all kinds of crazy layout schemas that you've got to try to figure out how that's going to work.
People's thumbs are different lengths.
That's the other thing,
you have
too.
to factor in things like this.
We invited some kids in to come play test our game, and so I handed a couple of them, because our focus right now is Android. So we had some of the tablets, and these poor little kids were like, I can't, because they're tiny hands. And so it was just a very interesting piece for us, because it really informed the way that we had to design the game through tapping as a little less, taking it, holding it, and trying to put it in the middle of a screen. When you're a tiny kid, you just don't have those fingers. What's interesting is you may be hearing us talk about how to manage community and all of that stuff, but we're also having a deeper side discussion, which I hope everybody takes with them, and that is community management. Once upon a time was about jumping on forums and telling people to be nice, but it needs to be embedded in the process of design and delivery, and the people who are heading up organizations need to be invested and understanding that community management, which any marketing people in here? So we have a game right now called, if any marketing person says relationship marketing, we go, welcome to the club, we've been doing it for decades. Relationship marketing is just a way for our friends in marketing to say community management. But when we look at the development of these things, having a community person in to be the interpreter and the arbiter and to talk about, hey, you're going to make this happen on PC, that's going to be great, but you roll that onto mobile and you're going to get a lot of hate. So it's important to note that, you know, your community manager, your social engineer, your friend wizard is somebody who ought to be baked into the process from the very beginning. And relationship management is a horrible, or relationship marketing is a horrible term.
So,
Wait. Can I? First of all, John, seriously, how dare you? How dare you, sir, call Angry Birds a casual game? You have clearly not played with my grandkids. But the point I want to make is that there are some areas of cross-platform play that you can never make work together. The Xbox and PlayStation are jealous gods, and they will not work together. And the pipeline to go to those platforms is very different as well.
Yeah.
So if you're publishing to PlayStation, to Xbox, and to the PC, you've got 3 different publishing paths. And it's unfortunate that those communities can never play together. I don't know where this is going to go in the future, because they're protecting their market share. They want people to be loyal to their one hardware product. And yet the players want to communicate together. So
Yeah.
I find that they often do their communication on other channels.
Yeah.
And I'm just joking about the Angry Birds thing, by the way.
The artificial constraints, I think, we've seen that as an old model. I think, and players do find ways around that kind of stuff. But can you play on, right now we're focused on Android, learning a lot. Is there that artificial wall between iOS and Android?
No.
Yeah,
No.
because,
No,
yeah. I
but they
didn't
play
think so.
well together.
Yeah, very well.
Yeah, it's made our life a lot easier. Crusaders of Light is on Facebook Game Room and just launched on Steam, and then it's on iOS and Android. And, you know, on a good day, it just seems like you have, you know, one whole community, right? And on a bad day, something goes wrong for the Android players, and they lose a bunch of stuff, and you have to deal with it, and it's a problem. But it works, you know, the fact that we're cross-platform on those specific platforms, or at least Android and Apple and Facebook Game Room players can all play together on the same servers, works really well for us. And, you know, being able to give them the opportunity to game wherever they're most comfortable, right? Like we were talking about, you know, go home, they've got a few hours to spend, straight onto the PC they go, and then they can pick up that progress, as we said, commuting on their way to work on the mobile phone.
Oh gosh, and if you're a small developer and you are dependent upon those numbers and you've got all of these platforms that you're managing, your player base it grows exponentially because they're finding different ways to get into the game through different devices.
You're making it as easy for them to play wherever they are as possible.
Yep.
So, communication styles and channels. How have your communication styles, what channels you pick, we've talked about this a little bit, changed just based on multi-platform? And do you do shared or combined communications? Has anybody tried breaking it out? So this is game X for Xbox. This is game X for Mac OS.
In terms of general communications, especially on social media, we keep all of our platforms together.
Yeah.
However, in forums, especially because forums are where people in our gaming communities go for the latest updates or for issues that they're having and that sort of thing. So we'll have a forum which is broken into, here's the PC section, here is the PlayStation section, here's the Xbox section, because there are differences between them. But in the general section, is where we tend to communicate best. And on social media, it's all interchangeable, and we'll address it as you go along.
We're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We're going to use
'Cause
hashtags
we don't have
to
enough of us
differentiate.
to go around.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely
hashtags are
not.
a great idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we break out our forums by platform. We've always done that just to try and keep it from being completely chaotic, too. You know, it's like the sheer number of posts that you get. But, yeah, there's only so many channels that we can focus on and focus on well. So we do try to channel all of our users to something that's a little bit more manageable and then do the rest of it ad hoc as we have to. You know.
Yeah. Communication style-wise, when I'm, communicating to folks on mobile, I'm like, hello, fellow kids. But honestly, it was really funny, the transition, because, All of us coming from MMO space, the bane of our existence has been patch notes. They are always lengthy. They are rarely 100% correct. And when I rolled over to mobile, I was like, oh man, I got to do this again. And then it said, you have 500 characters. And I was like, like angels fell from the heaven, and it was and so I had 500 characters to share. Got to the good stuff, and I thought, I'm going to take some of that back to the to the PC because I think people don't need to see all of that. Maybe they want to have access to it, but that first interaction. So there's a blending going on.
It's true, and one of the most interesting things I've learned, because my career has just jumped back and forth between PC, MMOs, and mobile, is that you do absolutely communicate completely different to those two, right? Because mobile gamers, man, you have to be short, to the point. If you can use pictures instead of words, to convey what's going on, that is super effective with those folks. When you're on the PC, much more elaborate communication happens, but you really do have to gear your method and way of communication based on that platform.
I do have a, go for it.
Sorry, the tone of communication varies as well from platform to platform. We adopt a very different voice when we're on Facebook as opposed to Twitter, as opposed to forums. And now I've got a question for you guys. This is something that at Tryon Worlds we've recently started doing, and that is we spend more time in game talking directly to people there on global channels. Have you guys done that much?
So we're rolling out an events system where our developers are going to be in game during certain hours and certain times, because there's nothing more effective, in my opinion, than having the person who's making the game.
It's great.
Then go in and we, it's kind of crass, but we say, eat your own dog food. Like go in and you play, and I'll tell you, bugs get fixed like that. And even some where they're just like, I can't believe I've been making people suffer like this, or this is really irritating to me, and then the next day it's fixed. But the real part of that is more interaction. We don't allow chatting in game because I am worried about the way we present. I want the interactions to be important, and I want them to be fun, and I want them to be positive, but I also want to protect kids and protect them and protect anyone from abuses in game. And people in my office were really stressed out about that, and I said, well, so how many is acceptable? Like how many problems is acceptable? Is one okay? And they're all kind of quiet, and I was like, oh, 2 then, 3 then? And they're like, shut up, Troy, we get it. But we're looking at ways to get creative with that communication. But I think that getting your devs in game, that's a wonderful thing to do.
Nothing excites the players more either. If they see a dev in game, and it shows them how much you care, that you're just like them. You play the game as well. You have,
They want to know that.
It bonds them to you. It
How about
gets
your
them
group?
loyal.
Yeah, well, I get in game periodically for like major messaging, like major points that I'm trying to make or something like that. I generally do it on the forums, and our users are really used to that because of the persistency of the information rather than just being the current audience who happens to be online at that moment. But they do really like it when I show up for some kind of event or something like that, or when any of us are online. We're usually online before major patches, so we'll be talking to them about like what's about
coming,
to drop.
yes.
And,
That's great.
Managing those expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it.
I think we'll only be down for 5 minutes, maybe.
But it could be. We'll let you know if it gets long.
I was
Exactly.
going to say,
know.
if you're ever responsible for messaging, never actually
Give
try
an
to
actual
measure
time.
it.
Yeah.
Approximately is our favorite word.
Yeah, I
Right,
usually
right.
say, probably 3 days. Only an hour? Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Exactly.
I had a quick question for the audience, Eric, and I don't mean to derail us. How many of you have an actively launched app, mobile app, in a game store? Yeah, interesting. How many of you want to reach through your phone screen and throttle your reviewers? Yeah.
But
Let's have a
that's
talk about
true
that
for-
later.
Yeah. I mean, Steam reviews, come on.
Yeah.
They're just as bad, really.
Yeah,
It's-
honestly.
It is really unfortunate that people don't put as much thought into their reviews as they do on Yelp. If
Or as
we had
many
a
different
Yelp
ways.
type system,
Yeah.
I'd be much happier.
Or as many different ways to contact them. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll take the I played your game for 10 minutes and gave you the honest feedback for 10 minutes over the I'm trying to be witty on Yelp any day of the week.
I don't know. We got a review that said stinky with 1 star, and I'm like, I don't even know what to do.
Did you tell them you showered?
No, what I did is I said, no, you.
Seems legit.
I wanted to, though.
One of the interesting trends that I have found with mobile apps, because I have great discussions with my boss. Let's just say we disagree sometimes, and I'm so glad he's not here right now, but he's somewhere around GDC, and he says, well, nobody uses forums anymore. I beg to differ. And he says, and mobile apps, none of them use forums. So I open up Heyday, and I say, Supercell, let me just go to their forums for you, because it's strange to me now that mobile games are growing up, that they're starting to spread out across more communication channels, and you're getting so much more in-depth communication and back and forth.
That is?
Because they're growing up.
I think they're growing up, and I also think that the hardware is allowing for people to do that kind of stuff, to run background apps that are voice,
It's all
that's
evolving.
Discord, and I think it's a part of it, but I also do think there are a lot of people that mobile component of gaming is kind of connecting a little bit more with what we've been doing for decades.
Yep.
And I also think that gamers are holding mobile app developers responsible for the quality of the games that they make.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's good, really.
yeah. I do
That
too.
you've got
Totally.
the two-way communication going, which was missing from mobile games for many, many years.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Are we totally derailing your
Derail.
talk? Okay,
But
good.
that's okay. I'm here to get you back on
Job
track.
accomplished.
So, how often in your games have you run into competing communities where
yeah.
the Android players feel like you love the iOS players better? That the PC players are clearly the favorites because the UI is optimized for the larger screen and keyboard and mouse. So, how have you guys run into this situation in the past, and how have you handled it?
That's a really, really tough one. I mean, we just launched a progression server called Rift Prime, which is subscription only. And we're seeing running arguments between the Prime players and the free-to-play players. And it's really, really strange. Their perception is we favor one over the other. The Prime players feel that free-to-play players are getting all the stuff first, and they've got everything easier, and we're focused on them. Whereas the free-to-play people think that we're investing all of our time in Prime and not fixing any of their issues. And neither of those things is true. So we find that we're generally addressing both communities at the same time and trying to make sure that we mention each one every time that we communicate on that platform until they get used to it. But I've seen the same thing with console players versus PC players, especially if there's a disparity in the production schedule due to the numbers of tests and certifications you have to go through on console.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I agree with Linda that you definitely wanted to make everyone feel like you dislike them equally.
Because we do.
But
Wait.
That's not what you said? That's a direct quote that's on video. You heard it.
Oh my God.
I hope this is reflected in our rating.
I hate you
Anyway,
so much.
but the real deal for us is that we are really working hard because we started with our VR. We added the PC component. And we're moving into mobile, and mobile now will be kind of part of the we call it the uniting of the tribes. They will all be together. But we play a lot of the indie dev stuff is a currency, and indie dev love and sharing what our plans are and making sure that those, because frankly, we don't have enough people to keep the PC build in line with what's going on with the mobile build, and we got some bills to pay, and the activities that are on mobile maybe help in, when we're visiting China and talking to friends who may want to help us. It's important that we focus on that, but we never leave anybody out of our adventures. They know what to expect, and they know that we've built really strong relationships and a lot of goodwill with those folks. They know, they get to see us unfold our plan and move through those spaces. So it's not, we always say it's not that we don't love you, it's just that, there's just too many of you to love all at once. But we are also very, very open about timing, even if we try to hedge our bets and say, around spring, that kind of stuff. But we also have found, because we're early in development, and you've got, well-established people who have done this, but our process is just starting. And so we find setting the tone at the very outset, and even though we may be launched in the Philippines, we can still invite our people that are in VR and on PC to come be the vanguard of telling us how the game plays on mobile and what they think will be wrong when we try to connect it to PC. And we listen. So far so good.
Really quickly, I have a very specific example of how we had to deal with this particular situation. When we launched Crusaders of Light on mobile, for business purposes, we launched on Android 1 week later than we did on iOS. So as you can imagine, all these people are looking forward to jumping into the game, and then they're told, hey, these people get to play the game first, and these other people have to wait. So, let's be honest about it. We're in a business here, and things are kind of sometimes dangled in front of you like, hey, you could potentially get featuring if you launch on one first before the other. So you have to make those kind of business decisions, right? Because it can make all the difference in the popularity of your game. So we went ahead and we had these 2 different launch dates, and it was very hard. It was hard because, the players want to know why. Why are we getting the game a week later than everyone else is? And you just have to do your best. It's good because, I think it's a little bit more commonplace now than it used to be. It's not unheard of to launch on one platform, on mobile before the other. But, what we did, we were very lucky in that situation, in that you got to always look at the player's motivation for why they get angry about these things. And in this case, they hadn't seen the game yet. They just wanted to get in. So once we were able to launch on that, on Android, all the anger went away, right? Because then they were in and they were concentrating on the game and everything. Much better situation than, say, you're way into release time and something bad has happened to one as opposed to the other, and they're angry because they've invested money and time and everything in the game. But for us, we kind of battled a little bit at the beginning there with how honest do you be with your community? We don't want to tell them, the farthest we would go is say, for business reasons, we're launching on this platform and then a week later on the other one. But it's really hard to manage because those perceptions at the very beginning are super important. So they've been looking ever since to say, hey, you love iOS more than you love Android. So you just have to do everything you can to mitigate that and try to make them all feel equal.
They're like, we've been here before.
Yeah.
So.
We've always had a bit of a challenge with this because we started on PC so much earlier than we moved to mobile. And also because we are a relatively small indie shop, we have relatively limited development resources. So there was a perception that was very correct by the user base that the development on mobile was cutting into content drops and content development. And that really built up over time a still established degree of, I would call it bitterness, I guess, among some PC players towards mobile development in general. Now, at the same time, a lot of them have come to really like mobile, and they also use it, and then there's a lot of mobile people who have come in and played on PC, and there's just a lot of cross-utilization. So it's not that bad, but it's always been kind of an ongoing discussion point for us. And for my own part, dealing with these same kind of business versus communication struggles, like, I really like to opt to be blunt. Like, I can't be blunt to the point of being like, this is how much money we're getting paid to do this. But I do like to try and be fairly honest with the user base whenever I can. And when we started doing mobile, this became more challenging just because of the diversity and the secrecy of the stuff that we were doing with all these different OEMs. And, we were in every Verizon commercial for a year. I couldn't tell them about that or like what went into that. So, a lot of the time I'm having to unfortunately make, very vague statements of like, this is really important to the game, and you would believe me if you understood what was going on. But you really have to come up with ways to try and address that as best that you can, to try and curb that degree of bitterness that can evolve over time.
It's really no different than if anybody here comes from a family with more than 2 children. If you have 4 or 5 children in the family, they're all competing for your affection as well. And from that, I learned that you just have to keep talking to them on all the different platforms. And we've also started to do, if if a feature is coming to one platform, we try to get a commitment to when it's also available on the other platform so that
Right.
we can talk about it right then. Because we found that people are actually highly accepting of it if they know when they're getting X. But nowhere is this perception more obvious than when we're doing a live stream. And I'm talking about in the live stream and say, why don't you fix that bug? Oh, honey, you don't want me touching that code. If I go to work on that, then everything's going to explode and you
That
aren't going to
is-
have a game.
It is one of my favorites, and that is one thing that I have seen across all the platforms, and that is, I can't believe you're putting in spring art. Why haven't you balanced the gun that does? And it's like, okay, once again, player, this is not how it works. Just because we're doing a live stream doesn't mean that when we leave, we're going to sit down and do some coding. That's just like, these two things can happen concurrently, even if you feel like it isn't. Oh, man.
Well, so one of the things I found really interesting when working on Defiance was what you could give away on different platforms.
Oh, yes.
If you sell it in the store on PlayStation or Xbox, you're not giving it away. At least specifically hard currency. They don't want you doing that. That is not allowed. But you can give it to the PC players. So do you give it to the PC players?
Yep.
Or do you not give it to anyone?
You do. You still do the giveaways. Heck, we're multi-streaming with our live streams, and the only people who can enter our draws are the people who are watching on Twitch, because that's where the randomizer thing is. So if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, you don't get to enter those. So that's another platform thing. People get really mad that they can't enter from Facebook, but sometimes you just have to be open and honest at the outset,
Yeah.
and make sure that they have the information. It's when they find out afterwards that they can't do something that is
They
the
get
biggest
angry,
problem.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I do feel that it's not one of those things where when you have those 4 children and they're not sharing and this person can't have the thing, so nobody can have the thing.
Right. Yeah.
That's not, I think you need to really lean on your communications people, your community folks, to describe the policies that prevent them from giving things away. Systems are wildly different across all those platforms, but I find that they'll listen. And if they have an issue with that, I also find ways not to be petty or petulant, but if there's a bad policy, which the policy that Cleaver described, I think, is a bad one. There are ways for those players to share those thoughts with the people that are responsible for making those decisions, and I just make sure to include that information and any kind of description.
Yeah.
So let's talk about unique bugs, because coding is not equal. And so that means that whenever you do a deployment, one platform's going to have bugs that other platforms don't experience. One platform might lose progress, lose items, lose time that other platforms don't experience. Do you compensate only one group? How does that all work? And how do you guys approach those sorts of situations?
Oh, compensation, yeah. I think you have to, really, because you're looking at a group that is seeing everybody around them playing and having a good time, and they're upset, and they're on the communication platforms to express their unhappiness, and it is going to happen. What if your build for Xbox went all wonky and people are crashing out all the time? You have to deal with that. We had some issues with Trove on this, where we had some really serious stability issues on one of the platforms. You have to go in there and communicate as much as you can, and then, if you can give them compensation, do.
Absolutely.
For a
Because
minute there, I honestly thought when you said that we really have a problem with Troy.
No, I always have a problem with Troy.
How do you know I'm playing?
What are
It's not all about you, Troy.
You and your persecution complex, sir. But yes, I think you do. I think you do need to.
I think you
address
compensate,
them.
and you compensate generously, and
Always.
and I also think that when you add the layer of, if you have one shared community, one united community, and you lose a chunk of those folks that don't get to interact with their friends, that don't get to connect. And if you're running a free-to-play game, those folks who are coming into play who maybe aren't spending a bunch of money, and I'm not going to use any of the offensive terms for the people that do, you're losing content. And so I believe that if you have the opportunity, if something goes wrong with your service, I would rather be very generous in compensation across the board to all folks so that they know we care enough and we're taking care of those folks. Those folks feel taken care of, and if it happens on their platform, they know that we're going to be paying attention. And the conversation changes, the tone changes, and it also underscores we're one community. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. We generally try to generally treat everybody roughly the same, you know, across all platforms whenever we possibly can, and compensate well and compensate early, and you know, take good care of people and communicate very clearly about what's going on when something is going awry. I mean, communication is so critical to just having that level of trust between your player base and the development team. And it's especially challenging when you start breaking out onto these additional platforms. Like we roll our own engine completely, all our own tech, and you know, we run into way more bugs and problems on mobile than we ever do on PC, just because the stability of the video drivers is just not as solid there. Yeah, new devices are getting shipped all the time that have like brand new code in them, and you're like supposed to be a featured product on that device, and the device, you know, blows up in some terrible way. So communicating about all that and making clear what's going on and how you're trying to look out for people, you know, that's critical. But at the same time, there's, you know, goes back to kind of the earlier question, you know, there can be a degree of resentment from one platform that sees that you're spending a tremendous amount of time doing maintenance on another platform. Yeah. And that, you know, it all kind of rolls in together into the same sorts of issues.
I want to piggyback off of something that John just said that I think is really important. If you are a developer that has one or more games that is multi-platform, you just need to make sure that you have a community team. And by that, I mean more than one person. Because here's the deal, when you are dealing with all these different communities and something goes wrong on one, if you don't have enough community people, because what I like to do is I like to take one person of the team and say, go chase this down.
You're the czar of this
You
thing,
are the
yeah.
czar of this one thing on this one platform. Go talk to the developers. You know, the developers are going to ask for information. Go back to the players who are reporting the problem. Get as much details as you can. You know, be the go-between. Help facilitate. Figure out what the hell is happening so that you can then, you know, come back to the rest of us. We can talk about communication strategy, and we can execute on bringing everyone publicly up to speed on what's happening when we think things could be resolved and all that stuff. It's super, super important because, as we know, you know, daily live community operations, you've got your plan, and then we just also have to deal with all of these things that come up out of nowhere, you know, catching these little wildfires and putting them out. So you need to have a robust community team. You can't just have one person dealing with one or more products that are out there, you know, available on multiple platforms. It's super important to be staffed appropriately.
Absolutely, and if you're a small indie developer, you're also going to have to train and trust other people who may not necessarily have those skills baked in. They may not have been born with it, but they can learn how to do these things and to manage a tone and a tenor, because a lot of times when you're dealing with reporting a bug or sharing with the world what it is that's wrong with a particular thing, you've got to write it up here, but then you've got to prepare the tweet here, and then the Facebook post goes here, but it can't do that because you've got a link to the Twitter, and then you've got your CMS, and then you've got what all this, I mean, so it is the calculus on how what pops off first is, you know, try as you might to automate some of that stuff, you just can't. But it really is important to spread out that work and to create those R's. Like, you are the person who's carrying the water on this. You need to be sure that you're communicating it and that our language reflects across all of our communications channels the same stuff.
I think one of the interesting opportunities is actually leveraging your customers to help take care of this. Because if you spend a lot of time with your community, you know that there's those people who are experts, who, you know, they're the guy who's always giving you the bugs.
Yes.
Going to them and saying, hey, can you tell me what's going on right now? Because I don't have time necessarily to look into every nook and cranny. So I need to get as much work and help from you guys as possible.
And if those folks are using their powers for good, sometimes you find out through them before you find out anywhere else.
That's what I was going to say.
How many of you run, it would be the modern day parlance is influencer programs, but yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of experience here running and empowering groups of people, because every game I've ever played, even in mobile games, has this helper component that of people that want to say, here's how you do this thing. And they want to write, they want to be a part of educating. Those are great folk. While they can sometimes turn out to be megalomaniacs, you do it long enough and you can pick those people out before they get to be troublesome. But really leveraging your community to help spread the word and to help talk to you and say, oh, hey, I don't know if you've seen this dark corner of the internet where they're confused. Yeah, I think that's another really great point. Have people on your team, if you're the only communications person, get your CEO, get your, I don't care what they are, if they can type and talk and are amenable to your expectations as it relates to, treating your customers right. And then leverage those community leaders, and they'll do it and love it for free.
Yeah, for free.
So I want to give you guys a chance to ask questions, and we only have a couple minutes left. So if you guys want to file up to this microphone here in the middle, that would be fantastic. Don't be shy. Come ask questions, even if you don't really think it's a good question, just so we have some people. I'll take this opportunity to again remind you to fill out the evaluations. Thank you very much. It's very much appreciated.
Okay, so everyone can hear me clearly? Okay.
Oh, yes.
So you talked about like multiple platforms and messaging for different platforms, but what happens when something like actually goes wrong for an individual? What are your best support channels individually? Like if somebody has a problem on Android, how do you get back to them on Android via somebody having a problem on Xbox and you now needing to get back to them directly on Xbox?
Well, for me, and I've been talking this whole time, so I apologize. Again, my name is Richard Weil. But for Android, what we've done, I can only speak to that right now, but we've actually captured their tag, and we know who they are, and we can send them a direct message to their phone. But we also manage a lot of our stuff through Zendesk. Zendesk has a really fabulous mobile component. I am definitely looking for other resources that may be more mobile friendly, but yeah, it is a challenge. iOS, I'm imagining, will bring a whole new level of trying to get that person to feel supported, but get their email address.
Yeah, we email convert every user, basically. So it's kind of a worst case scenario option. We would rather have something else, but.
I like that. He's like, hold the phone.
You say email convert, but what about kids?
Well, I mean, we're a 13 and over game, so that doesn't affect me.
So you kind of just dump that. What about everyone else?
So
How do you communicate with kids on your platforms?
Yeah, I mean, for mobile, it's using a mobile-specific tool is ideally, the best way to do it. Something that can, be integrated into your app through an API and directly message inside your client. That's what we do for Crusaders of Light. The challenge is that our mobile-specific tool doesn't go to PC. So for PC, we're doing email conversion, and for mobile, we're doing the tool in the app. It works fairly well. It's not ideal. Using email is never ideal, but PC players tend to do better with it than mobile players, in my experience.
But the COPA compliance stuff, you're right. It's challenging, and it's challenging, and it's different in different countries. But yeah, that's a tough one. Let me know when you figure
usually
it out.
When you're dealing with children, usually you count on the parents to contact you, and that's where we get most of our contacts, is directly from them.
We're legally obligated to let the parent know that we can contact that child if they end up signing. Yeah, we can talk about this later, but yeah.
Okay.
So I know community management is about a lot more than telling people when they're being mean and getting them to stop being mean. But say you do have a griefy player, just hypothetically. or you do see that coming into the community a lot. How active should a code of conduct or community guidelines be in the discussion, and how much is that leading the fomenting of a better community for any of you?
I think it's extraordinarily important to maintain a code of conduct or just some community standards, because as you know, I've done the math, it's less than 0.5% of your players will be griefers. Those are the people who are clogging up your communication channels, being absolute jerks to each other and innocent bystanders. And there is no reason to keep them in game, even if they have a high lifetime value, because they negatively affect hundreds of other people.
Yeah.
So at Tryon, we have been actively clamping down on this. And our own CEO has been in game and giving people mutes, and that's kind of cool to see. And then he sends a broadcast out. Yeah, he sends a broadcast out across the server saying, hey, yeah, you know, we have just given chat mutes to the people who were disrupting our good time tonight. Have a great evening. And the chat erupts with applause because nobody wants to look at that stuff. Mm-hmm. You know, you've got filters in game if you don't want to see swear words, but I use the occasional expletive. We don't care about that. We care about ongoing abuse and disruption in the game. Yeah. We don't need those people. They're not welcome in our house. So, but every company's different. Some companies think that sort of nasty toxicity is what the game's all about. Not for Tryon games, but any of you guys? No?
I think that the community standards, beyond the terms of service and all of that stuff that nobody's reading, but I actually like to engage directly with the community to say, here's the fundamentals, what are we missing? And have them be a part of it. And as the community evolves, they start parroting that information. They start being the arbiters and helping people and
self-regulating.
Yeah,
it is
sometimes
very much so.
And sometimes people who, you know, there are those people that Linda's describing, that very small percentage,
Tiny.
and they're easily removed because they are toxic, no matter how much money they contribute. But there are those people that just have a bad day. Yeah. So having the policy, but having that way to get back into good graces, because when you do that, they'll...
Yeah, it's usually escalating.
So we have 5 minutes left, so we're going to go to lightning round now.
Yes.
So you are the first contestant in lightning round.
So may I ask a question, right?
Yeah.
You have some time? Cool. Thank you for the great discussion. You know, I'm a marketing guy, not a community manager, so I have a tricky one for you. When you run a big PC MMO with a lifetime of several years, we usually see that there is a part of the community that behaves toxic, that usually complains about monetization, bugs, and stuff. But when the product changes, the problems have been solved, and when you do a user acquisition campaign several years after the launch, the users actually Google the name of the game. They actually they discover this toxic part of the community that always complains about stuff. But at this point, the stuff they're not the actual problems right now. They're myths that have been solved before. So could you give any advice on how to communicate with the newcomers, for the new players that discover this toxic part of the community, so they won't fall under their influence?
So you shake off the old baggage and trying to communicate to new players that this stuff has been fixed, but there it is in Google. Okay.
Yeah. It's quite challenging to pull that off sometimes, because you know, that people can come in with very strong expectations and bad memories and whatever else. But I have found that probably the best single way of getting that addressed is having your user base be really well informed and be your biggest advocates, because they will go out there on every forum where somebody is saying something bad about some aspect of it that was fixed 2 years ago, and they will speak to it, like even without your involvement. At the same time, we also monitor a lot of communications and content that's out there.
Yeah, I think the one last thing I'd say is you have to be extra careful now. From now on, you don't get the luxury of having a bad day. You have to be perfect, because every time you screw up in the future, calls back and reinforces what happened behind. So, I mean, it's just constant vigilance is the only way to
We also have,
address it.
at the end of this, we have a little breakout session. I want to give you some little advice that worked for me for something like this, but
cool.
when we're done, we can talk a little. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can't really see you, so find me. I'm like,
these legs.
Hey, I just realized I have way too many questions. It was a great session. Thank you. Maybe I'll take it up later. So I'm going to try to keep it short. Just some feedback regarding the kids. I work with the MMORPG game for kids, for girls between 9 and 15. I'm from Sweden. Hi, Star Stable here. And just so you know, because we have underage kids, COPA is only for US and always requires email verification. And if you want to have a customer support for kids, use the email verification system, the parent email verification system, sorry. And soon the GDPR is coming for Europe, so get prepared for that as well. Just tips and advice. Now I also have, okay, I'm just going to have one question. So because we have underage audience, we don't have forum. Most of our audience is actually on Instagram and Facebook. And when I mean a lot, I mean we get like 20,000 likes on Instagram and 500 comments. And Instagram is
huge.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, yay. But Instagram is not a good platform to have a good conversation. So we are currently actually looking at how we solve this, and I would really like to hear your feedback from your experiences. From your experience, would it be better to build our own platform due to the age of our audience, or actually use one of the existing platforms for the community management, for the communication?
I'm going to shoot real fast. Use the existing platforms to move them into your own.
We are not on Steam, yeah. We are very specific. We just have website, you have download the launcher, and we are not on Steam. Yeah.
I don't think there's necessarily a simple answer to that one,
but we'll jump out. We do
we'll
have a
jump
little
out
breakouts that we can chat some more. Yeah.
Okay. That was actually my question. There we go.
Hi, Philip, founder of Stomp. So we have developed a feedback platform for in-game feedback. And my question is, how does your feedback process look like, or feedback management process? Are you trying to close the feedback loop, or it's hard to get back to specific persons on specific channels, especially as you're collecting feedback from so many different channels? So how do you manage that? Is it even possible for you right now?
It's not impossible, but it's important.
It's very time consuming. With our games, each platform has its own feedback system because you're going to have different problems depending on what platform the game is on. But if we look at PC, for instance, our players can report issues within game. And we regularly have live streams where we advise people on how to make the perfect bug report so that things will actually get changed.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah.
Stealing that idea.
Well, do it, because it's actually, we had a very good discussion about this. But typically that feedback goes straight to the QA team from within game, and there is no feedback coming the other way. So inevitably somebody will post something similar to the forums, and we honestly use the forums because these can be very complex issues, and there can be very long discussions following them as well. So the people who are interested in getting the feedback on what they're submitting will go to the forums, and typically this is in the bug report section of the forums. That's all it's for. And our QA guys will respond there, our devs will respond there, and of course we will respond there because it's a very public arena where you can also, if the same question comes up on Twitter, I can go, yes, this discussion is ongoing right now, and put a link to that forum thread so that they can look into it as much as they want to.
Linda, do you encourage your QA folks or people who may be solving those bugs or those problems to communicate directly with players?
We prefer to do it on the forums because then it's a one-to-many relationship. So then they're responding to not just that one person, but publicly to everyone.
But you do like them to go onto the forums?
Oh
and speak to the
yeah,
masses?
absolutely.
That's where the
Our
industry
devs,
that's
QA
where the
guys,
industry's headed.
yeah.
Like,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I tried to reach out to each of you via LinkedIn beforehand, so if one of you could give me feedback, or all of you later on to the solution we have developed.
Yeah, we'll step outside and have a chat. Yeah, absolutely.
last question.
All right. Once again, thank you for the great session. Going from a team that dealt with a couple thousand players to now 3 actively supported games and millions of players, is there any tools you found, especially recently, to help you just monitor the feedback you're getting? Any sort of automated systems, or these are tonal evaluations that you find work, or is that all mostly pure bullshit?
There's a great panel that we need to, or a round table or something, but
We need to do that.
There's a lot that come close, but I find that oftentimes and painfully, you've got to have this patchwork of, Firebase plus this, plus that, plus,
There's no one tool that will do it for you, and there's no substitute for the human mind to filter out what really needs to be addressed. So what we have is we have a team of community managers, and then we also have contractors. The much maligned Richard Weil, for instance, works for Mod Squad, and they provide us with, and we have 6 games, but we have one moderator on 24/7. And these people switch out, of course, around the clock. And what they do is they go through all of our communication platforms, just a constant cycle.
Sweet.
And they call out issues that we should be addressing. And, they bring that to our special channel, then we send it off to Dev or CS or whoever else, or we dive in ourselves to do it. But there is no substitute for having a knowledgeable individual with good instincts who's going through this stuff manually. And it's not as expensive as you might think.
No, it's not. And also, I just think you lose a tremendous amount. Like, how many of you launched on through the Google Play Store? They're little random words, like one word is like love. And you're like, what? Love what? Like, love to hate your game. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. But no, it's a pain, yeah.
Yeah, I concur with earlier because we've dealt with the Steam negative review bomb before as well as other things, and it mostly cleared up. But when it happens, it's like, how do I react to this feedback? It's not usable in any way.
Right.
Yeah. But Linda's right.
And also, you can't be awake 24/7. Nobody can. So, Mod Squad, they're awesome. There are lots of different services that do that for people, but that happens to be the one that many
I do
of us
like Mod
use.
Squad too.
We gotta cut it, guys.
I just don't
we're
like that
done?
Richard Weil.
Yeah,
I know that Rich
we're
Weil.
well past done.
Thank you, guys.
Okay,
Hey, thanks for hanging out. We're
Thank
gonna
you,
stand
everyone.
out in the